The cold wind howled through the alleyway as Lila stood frozen, her hand trembling against the letter she had just received. She had always wondered if this moment would come, but now that it had, she wasn't sure she was ready to face it. The man who had built an empire off lies and deceit, the man she once called father, was about to shatter everything she thought she knew about her family. "You're here for the truth, aren't you?" Her voice was quiet but firm as she turned to face the man in the shadows. He stood there, the expression on his face unreadable. His eyes, once full of confidence and control, now seemed distant, unsure. Lila took a step forward, her gaze piercing through him. "Well, let me tell you. The truth you're looking for isn't in the fortune you've built. It's buried deep in the past, in the decisions you made, the lives you ruined, and the family you abandoned." She paused, the weight of her words sinking in. "This isn't just about money anymore. This is about the legacy you left behind, and it's time the world knew who you really are." The storm had only just begun. Lila stepped into the library, the faint smell of old books and dust hanging in the air like ghosts from the past. The grand wooden shelves stretched up toward the high ceiling, filled with the remnants of a legacy long forgotten. Her grandfather's journals, once the heart of her childhood memories, now seemed like relics of a time she no longer recognized. The old family portraits lining the walls felt like silent witnesses to the truth that had been buried here for so long. She walked slowly, every step heavy with the weight of the inheritance she had never wanted but was bound to carry. Her fingers brushed the leather-bound covers of the books, each one a reminder of the power and control her family had accumulated over the years. But as her eyes scanned the rows, she realized the books held no answers to the questions that had been tormenting her. Lila had always believed that wealth and power were the markers of success, that they defined her family's legacy. But now, standing in this room, she saw the cracks in the facade. The empire her father had built came at a cost, one she hadn't fully understood until now. There was a secret hidden in these pages, a truth that would destroy everything she had known. And Lila was determined to uncover it, no matter what it cost her. The library had been silent for far too long. It was time for its secrets to be revealed. Lila sat at the polished oak desk in her father's old study, the sound of the clock ticking on the wall filling the silence. The room was suffocating, heavy with the scent of leather and rich mahogany. The walls were adorned with old portraits of ancestors who had long since passed, their eyes seeming to watch her as she read the will that would change everything. The letter she held in her hands trembled as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words that were written with her future in mind. "To my beloved daughter, Lila," the will began, its cold formalities echoing in the quiet room. "I leave you the family estate, the fortune built over decades, and all that comes with it, but understand this. You are now the keeper of our legacy. You must carry it forward for the sake of our family name, or it will all be lost." Lila could feel her heart drop into her stomach. The inheritance wasn't just wealth, it was a responsibility, a curse passed down through generations. Her father had always been a man of ambition, driven by a need to build an empire at any cost. But now, in his absence, Lila was the one who would be forced to carry the weight of his choices. She closed the will and exhaled, the words of her father lingering in her mind. There was no escaping the legacy he had left behind. It was hers now, whether she liked it or not. The long driveway leading up to the family estate seemed endless, flanked by towering oak trees whose gnarled branches whispered secrets of a forgotten past. Lila's car glided past the iron gates, the familiar sights of her childhood now feeling distant and strange. The grand estate loomed ahead, its stone walls weathered by time, yet still imposing. The mansion that had once been a symbol of success and power now felt like a prison, holding the weight of all her family's sins within its walls. As Lila stepped out of the car and onto the gravel path, a chill ran down her spine. She hadn't set foot here in years, since the day her father had sent her away to college, never to return. Now, after his death, she was back. Not for a family gathering or a celebration, but to face the truth he had kept hidden for so long. She walked up the steps of the mansion, her heart heavy with anticipation. The door creaked open, as if the house itself were groaning under the burden of the secrets it held. Inside, the grand hall was just as she remembered. High ceilings, chandeliers casting soft shadows across the marble floors. But there was no warmth here, no sense of home. Only coldness, as if the house was waiting for her to unravel the mystery. Lila's footsteps echoed through the empty hall, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her inheritance settle over her. There was no turning back now. Lila sat at the grand dining table, the place where her family had gathered countless times, laughing, celebrating, and hiding their true selves. The elegant table, now covered in dust, seemed to mock her with its silence. As she looked around the room, memories of family dinners and whispered arguments flooded her mind. But now, there was no warmth here, no laughter, only a growing sense of dread. The letter from her father was still in her hands, its words haunting her every thought. It had taken days to gather the courage to read it, but now that she had, Lila realized just how little she truly knew about her father, his empire, and the dark truth that had been buried beneath his success. The will had been just the beginning. The envelope she had found was thick with legal documents and photographs, some of which had been sealed for years. With trembling hands, Lila opened them one by one. There were pictures of her father, younger, standing with business partners, but there was something unsettling about their expressions. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes, and their handshakes felt like deals made in the shadows. It wasn't just about the money, it wasn't just about power. The documents revealed a story of manipulation, exploitation, and betrayal, of lives destroyed for the sake of building an empire that was never truly meant to last. Lila's father had done things she couldn't even imagine, and now it was her turn to face the consequences. Lila paced in her father's study, the room still as imposing as it had been when she was a child. The leather chairs and heavy wooden desk seemed to loom around her, the weight of their presence a constant reminder of everything her father had built and destroyed. Her hands were trembling as she held the envelope with the damning documents, the truth of her family's legacy now burning through her veins. Victor Lawrence, the man who had shaped her entire life, was nowhere to be found. But Lila knew that the truth she carried in her hands was all that mattered now. She had uncovered the darkness of her father's past, the manipulation, the deals made at the cost of human lives, the ruthlessness that had defined his success. It wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't just about power. It was about the lives ruined in the process. She had spent days, weeks, maybe even months trying to make sense of it all, but now there was only one thing left to do. She had to confront him, the man who had given her life, yet had also built an empire on lies, the man who had taught her that success was everything, even if it meant breaking others to get there. With a final breath, Lila gathered the courage to pick up the phone. She dialed the number she hadn't dialed in years, the number of the man who had made her childhood a silent war zone. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. "Lila!" Victor's voice came through the phone, cool and distant, like he didn't expect her to call. He probably didn't. "What is it? You've been quiet for too long?" Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a deep breath. "We need to talk. Now." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low chuckle. "I'm sure you've found something, haven't you? Something that's bothered you enough to make that call. What is it this time, Leela? Did you find the money? The accounts I've hidden away? Or is this about something else entirely?" Lila's voice tightened. "It's not about the money anymore. It's about the lies. It's about the legacy you left behind, one built on the suffering of others. I've seen the documents, Father. I've seen the photographs, the contracts, the lives you ruined to get everything you have, and I'm done. I'm done carrying your name. I'm done carrying your legacy." There was silence on the other end of the line, a heavy, suffocating silence. She could hear his breath, slow, deliberate. "You don't understand, do you?" His voice was colder now, like the air in the room had turned ice cold. "I did what I had to do to survive, Lila. I built this family. I gave you everything you have, and now you want to tear it all down because of some photographs?" "No," Lila said, her voice steady now. "I want to tear down the empire you built on lies, on manipulation, on hurting people. This was never about survival, Father. This was about power, and it was never yours to have." Victor was silent for a long moment before he finally spoke again, his voice a thin thread of anger. "You think you can change everything? You think you can undo the years of work I've put into this? You think you can tear this family apart with your moral high ground?" Lila stood tall, her fingers tightening around the envelope in her hands. "I'm not trying to tear it apart, but I am trying to rebuild it. The truth is out there now, and there's nothing you can do to hide it. The family legacy ends with you, Father. I will not carry it forward." "I built this empire," he spat. "You have no right to destroy it." "You destroyed it long before I found out," Lila replied, her voice sharp. "And now it's my turn to rebuild, starting with the truth." With that, she hung up the phone, the finality of the action settling into her chest. It wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time in her life, Lila felt like she was free. The truth had been set loose, and there was no turning back. It was no longer about the wealth or the legacy her father had built. It was about her, the daughter who had learned to face the truth, no matter the cost. And the fight was only just beginning. The heavy air in the room seemed to press against Lila as she stood in front of the mansion, watching her father's silhouette retreat into the shadows of the study. The conversation had left her shaken, yet resolute. For the first time, she had confronted the man who had shaped her life, and for the first time, she saw him for who he truly was, flawed, scared, and incredibly broken. Victor had spent a lifetime creating a legacy that was, in his mind, meant to be admired. He had believed that the path to success was paved with power, control, and the complete disregard for those who stood in his way. But Lila had seen through it. She had uncovered the empire of lies, the web of manipulation that stretched across her family's history. And now, with the truth in her hands, she was going to change everything. The phone call had been difficult. The confrontation had been painful. But as Lila stood alone in the hallway of her childhood home, she knew that what she had just done was the only way forward. There was no healing without honesty. There could be no redemption without facing the mistakes of the past. Yet even as the weight of the past began to settle into her chest, Lila understood that the real challenge now wasn't just exposing the truth, it was learning to live with it. Her father had spent his life hiding from his mistakes, burying the consequences of his actions beneath layers of wealth and control. Now the truth was no longer hidden, and there was no running from it. Lila had always believed that her family's fortune was the key to everything, that the wealth, the power, the status were what mattered most in this world. But now she understood something much deeper. The things that really mattered, honesty, integrity, and the ability to face one's past, were worth more than any amount of money or legacy her family could offer. She made her way up to her father's office, the place where years of decisions had been made. The desk was cluttered with papers and old photographs of a younger, more hopeful Victor. His achievements, his triumphs, seemed like distant echoes now. It was as if the weight of all those years of ambition had come crashing down in an instant. Lila took a deep breath before sitting down at the desk. She pulled out the documents she had gathered, her father's illegal dealings, the contracts that bound lives to his will, the lies he had built his empire on, and placed them on the desk in front of her. The man who had spent his life building a legacy of power was now facing the reality of its destruction. Her father had built this empire for himself, but in doing so, he had broken his family and crushed the dreams of countless people. The truth couldn't undo the damage, but it could offer a new beginning. With a final, steadying breath, Lila picked up the phone and dialed the number of the lawyer who had been assisting her with the estate. "It's time," she said, her voice firm. "I want to start the process of dismantling everything he built. We're going to set the record straight." She hung up the phone and leaned back in the chair, staring out at the vast grounds of the estate. The mansion, once a symbol of power and wealth, now felt like a shell of what it once was. It would no longer stand as a monument to lies and corruption. Lila had learned that sometimes redemption wasn't about rebuilding what was lost. It was about walking away from the past, no matter how hard it was. Lila stood up and walked out of the office, closing the door behind her. As she did, she realized that the hardest part was over. She had faced the truth, and now she was free to build something of her own, a future defined by her values, not her father's mistakes. And for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. The days after the confrontation were filled with a strange kind of silence. Lila walked through the mansion as though in a dream, her footsteps echoing in the halls where the ghosts of her father's empire still lingered. She had made the decision to dismantle everything he had built, to undo the legacy of power and manipulation he had passed down to her. But the weight of that decision hung heavily on her shoulders. Every room in the house told a story of ambition and sacrifice. The walls that had once echoed with laughter and joy now only reverberated with the consequences of greed. Lila found herself standing in front of her father's study, staring at the closed door. It was a door she had never thought she would walk through again, but now it was the threshold between her past and her future. Lila had made peace with the past, but the future was still a question mark. What would she do with the inheritance? With the empire? She could tear it all down, burn it to the ground, and walk away. But would that be enough? Or was there a way to rebuild? Was there a way to use the resources at her disposal to create something meaningful, something that didn't rely on the manipulation and ruthlessness that had defined her family for so long? It was a question she had to answer. Lila took a deep breath, her hand resting on the doorknob. She opened it slowly the sound of the hinges creaking in the quiet of the house. The study was just as she remembered, dark wood paneling, old leather chairs, shelves filled with books and papers. But now it felt different. It felt like a place that had held too many secrets, too much power, and now it was just another room filled with memories that needed to be put to rest. Her father's desk sat at the far end of the room, papers scattered across it in no particular order. She walked over to it, taking a seat in the chair her father had so often occupied. The weight of it all hit her then, the realization that she wasn't just inheriting a fortune, she was inheriting the consequences of years of mistakes. She thought of her own life, her career, her relationships, her choices, and wondered if she could truly break the cycle. As she sat there, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her, the phone on the desk buzzed. It was her lawyer. She had put off this call for days, but now it was time to face the next step. "I've started the process," her lawyer's voice said, cutting through the silence. "The documents are being filed. We'll begin dismantling the estate and the businesses. It's going to take time." Lila closed her eyes, feeling a lump form in her throat. Time. That's all she had now, the time to make things right. But what did making things right even look like? She had never had the chance to define her own legacy. Everything she had done, everything she had achieved, had been built on the foundation her father had laid. It was time to break that foundation. It was time to build something new. "Thank you," Lila said, her voice steady. "Let me know when the papers are ready for signing. I'll be there." She hung up the phone and sat back in the chair, staring out the window at the sprawling estate that was now hers to dispose of. The choice was hers, and she knew that it wouldn't be easy. But it was hers to make. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she could choose her own path, one that wasn't defined by the weight of a name, but by the values she would build it on. Lila stood up, the sense of finality settling in her chest. There would be no more hiding, no more running from the past. She had made her choice, and now it was time to move forward. Lila stood at the edge of the estate, looking out at the sprawling grounds that had once been the epicenter of her family's empire. The house, the land, the fortune, it was all hers now. But it no longer felt like a prize. It felt like a burden, a weight that threatened to crush her if she let it define her. The legacy her father had left behind was one of power, greed, and manipulation. It was a legacy built on lies, and Lila knew that she couldn't carry it forward. She had made the choice to dismantle everything, the mansion, the business, the wealth that had come at the cost of countless lives. But what came next? What could she build that was worthy of the future she wanted to create? Lila walked away from the estate, leaving the past behind her. She knew that there was no going back, no undoing the years that had been shaped by her father's decisions. But she also knew that the future was hers to write. She didn't need the mansion, she didn't need the money. What she needed was a purpose, a way to create something that mattered, something that wasn't built on the suffering of others. She would use what she had learned, the mistakes of her past, to build something better. A legacy of honesty, integrity, and compassion. As she walked away from the remnants of her father's empire, Lila felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. The weight of the past had been lifted, and for the first time in her life, she was ready to start something new, a legacy of her own choosing. It was time to rebuild, and this time it would be built on truth. The months following Lila's decision to dismantle her father's legacy were filled with a quiet determination that she had never known. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, was emptied piece by piece. Every artifact, every piece of furniture, every photograph that had once been part of her family's empire was now either sold or donated. It was as if she were erasing the very foundation of her past to make room for something new. But even as the material remnants of her father's world were swept away, the emotional baggage lingered, following her like a shadow. The first few weeks had been the hardest. She had moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether she had made the right decision. There were days when the weight of what she had done seemed unbearable, when the loss of the fortune and the legacy felt too much to bear. She spent those days reflecting on her father's words, the sharpness in his voice when he'd accused her of tearing down everything he had built. But Lila knew better now. She understood that his empire had never been built on love or respect. It had been built on fear, control, and a desperate need for validation. She had seen firsthand the destruction it caused. For the first time in years, Lila was able to think without the constant pressure of living up to her father's expectations. She was free. She was free to chart her own course, to create a future that wasn't shackled by the mistakes of her past. One of the first things she did after leaving the estate was to focus on her career in law, but with a new perspective. She no longer saw it as just a means to power or status. It became a way to help people, to fight for justice and fairness, not just for herself, but for those who had been oppressed by systems of wealth and power. She began to take on pro bono cases, focusing on causes she had once overlooked: families fighting to keep their homes, children battling systemic inequality, individuals seeking justice for injustices they had suffered their entire lives. And then something unexpected happened. As Lila became more involved in these causes, she met people who had suffered far more than she ever had, yet who were resilient, determined, and hopeful. They had endured hardship and still found ways to rebuild their lives piece by piece. These people, ordinary people who had been through so much, became her inspiration. They reminded her that real strength didn't come from wealth or power. It came from the ability to endure, to rise after every fall, and to keep fighting for what was right. Lila started to see her own journey in a new light. She had been through hardship too, but now she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. She was doing what she had always dreamed of doing, using her voice to stand up for those who didn't have the same opportunities she had been given. One day, as she sat in her new, modest apartment, a letter arrived. It was from the attorney who had been handling her father's estate. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. The final papers had been signed, and the estate had been closed. But this letter was different. It was an invitation to a charity event, one that was focused on helping children in underserved communities receive education and the resources they needed to succeed. The event, it turned out, was being held at the very mansion she had walked away from just months ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. Lila stood by the window looking out over the city. The invitation sat on her desk, and for the first time, she realized something profound. She was no longer tied to the legacy of greed her father had created. She had been given the opportunity to build something completely new. And in that new world, she would choose how to shape her future without the constraints of the past. With a deep breath, Lila made a decision. She would go to the event. Not because of her father's legacy, but because it was a chance to use what she had learned to make a real difference in the world. She wasn't the daughter of Victor Lawrence anymore. She was Lila Lawrence, a woman with her own path, her own mission, and her own legacy to build. And as she stood up from her desk and grabbed the invitation, She realized that the journey she had started was only just beginning. The future was hers to shape, and it would be shaped by her choices, by the love, integrity, and compassion she would bring into the world. It was time to embrace the unknown, to walk forward with her head held high, and to build a new legacy, one piece at a time. Lila stood at the edge of a new beginning, looking back at the mansion she had left behind. The structure, once the towering symbol of her family's wealth and control, now felt insignificant. It was no longer a marker of success or power, but a reminder of a past she had chosen to walk away from. She had not just discarded the material wealth. As the days passed and the dust settled, Lila found herself feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The weight that had once burdened her, the responsibility of carrying forward a legacy built on deceit, was gone. She had finally embraced the freedom to create her own future, free from the shadows of her father's mistakes. The work she began to do in the world was more than just legal battles or charity events. It was about rebuilding something real, something meaningful. Lila's new legacy wasn't about wealth or status. It was about integrity, compassion, and the ability to take ownership of her choices. She had built her life on her own terms, and she had learned to trust herself again. Looking forward, Lila knew that the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, there would be moments of doubt, but she was no longer afraid of them. She had faced the truth of her past, and that truth had set her free. In the end, Lila understood that the legacy of her father was not hers to carry. It was hers to reshape. And in that reshaping, she had discovered that the most powerful legacy of all was the one we create with our own hands, shaped by our choices, not by our circumstances. The future was hers now, and it was time to write her own story.